Hello, everyone. Today we're starting a new series on Saturn and the signs. But before we begin, I want to thank you all for the support, the likes, and the subscriptions. I really appreciate you being here. Now to Saturn in the signs. Saturn is where the chart gets serious. It describes the part of life that asks for patience, maturity, discipline, and accountability. It shows where you meet limits, where you feel pressure to grow up, and where life does not usually let you get away with shortcuts. A lot of people hear Saturn and immediately think of fear, delay, restriction, or bad luck. Those associations are not entirely wrong, but they are too narrow. Saturn is really about structure. It shows where you are being asked to build something real, where you are tested, where time, effort, and consistency matter more than impulse. This placement says a great deal about how a person handles responsibility. Some people respond by becoming highly controlled and self-disciplined. Others feel the weight first and only develop strength over time. Some try to avoid Saturn's lessons altogether, but avoidance usually makes the pressure stronger. That is part of what Saturn explains. It gives shape to endurance, not the easy part of personality, not the part that moves quickly or effortlessly. The part that has to be developed through experience, mistakes, restraint, and repetition. Because of that, Saturn is often tied to difficulty, but it is not limited to difficulty. It also describes mastery. It describes self-respect. It describes the strength that comes from learning what can last. This is the part of the chart that deals with reality as it is, not as we wish it would be. It shows where we need boundaries, where we need backbone, and where life may feel slow until we become more grounded in ourselves. And that is where the sign becomes important. Saturn does not teach the same way in every sign. The sign changes the tone of the lesson, the kind of pressure a person feels, and the style of growth they are being asked to develop. In some signs, Saturn becomes highly disciplined, controlled, and practical. In others, it becomes more internal, more relational, more intellectual, or more emotionally complex. The weight may still be there, but the way it is carried can look very different. That is what this series is about. We are not just looking at where someone feels blocked or unlucky. We are looking at how Saturn actually works through each sign, what it demands, what it strengthens, what it matures slowly, and what happens when that energy is handled with wisdom instead of fear. Saturn can show where life feels heavy, but it can also show where a person becomes solid, capable, and deeply self-possessed over time. So as we go through Saturn in the signs, the goal is to understand the deeper mechanics of the placement, how it tests, how it hardens, how it protects, how it matures, and how it can become one of the strongest parts of the chart. And remember to like and subscribe if you want to follow the series, and book a consultation for a more personal understanding of your chart. Now to Saturn in Scorpio. Saturn in Scorpio does not skim the surface of life. It goes straight for the locked drawer. This is a sign that deals with depth, secrecy, trust, fear, power, attachment, loss, emotional survival, and all the subjects people claim they are totally comfortable discussing right up until the moment the conversation gets real. Scorpio is not interested in flimsy answers. It wants the truth under the truth. It wants to know what is driving people, what is hidden, what is unresolved, what has teeth. Then Saturn comes in and makes the whole thing heavier. So instead of treating intensity like a passing phase, the person usually feels it as part of the architecture. They may be private early, watchful, hard to read, slow to trust, very aware of undercurrents, very aware of what can be lost, what can be taken, what can be used against them, what can shift without warning. A lot of them grow up with a strong instinct to protect themselves, even when nobody around them notices. They can seem composed, controlled, maybe even intimidating in a quiet way, while inside there is a very active radar system scanning tone, motive, weakness, loyalty, threat level, and whether this person across from them means what they say or is just here to waste everyone's time. That radar is rarely random. Somewhere along the line, life usually taught them that trust is serious, vulnerability is serious, dependence is serious, love is serious, money, intimacy, betrayal, loyalty, endings, all of it can carry more weight here than people on the outside realize. So they adapt. They get careful. They get self-contained. They learn how to hold a lot without showing much. And that can make them incredibly strong. It can also make them very tired. Because Saturn in Scorpio does not always know how to relax its grip. If the world feels unpredictable, the instinct is to tighten. Hold the feeling in. Control the reaction. Stay guarded. No more than you reveal. Keep your cards close. Keep a backup plan. Keep another backup plan in case the first one gets dramatic and ruins dinner. This sign is not casual about stakes. Even when the person looks calm, there can be enormous pressure underneath. They may feel things deeply, but dislike feeling exposed. They may want closeness, but recoil the moment it starts becoming truly vulnerable. They may crave loyalty, yet test it. They may love hard, but reveal it slowly. They may act as though they are fine on their own, then quietly carry hurt for years like it is an heirloom. That is part of the challenge here. Scorpio wants full honesty, full depth, full commitment, but Saturn keeps one hand near the emergency exit. So the person can end up in a strange position, longing for deep fusion while also fearing what happens if they let someone get that close. And honestly, that fear is not always irrational. A lot of Saturn in Scorpio people know something about emotional weather. Maybe they grew up around power struggles. Maybe trust was complicated. Maybe privacy mattered. Maybe they learned early that people do not always say what they mean and do not always handle intimacy cleanly. Maybe they saw what happens when money, sex, resentment, control, or silence gets tangled up together. So they learn to read the room. Not just the room behind the room. That can make them psychologically sharp. They notice shifts. They catch what is unsaid. They are not easily fooled by surface charm once they mature a bit. They can sense where the pressure lives in a situation, which is a real gift. But the same gift can slide into suspicion if fear takes over. Then everything starts feeling loaded. Every silence means something. Every delay means something. Every change in tone means something. The person can become hypervigilant, intensely self-protective, and unwilling to loosen their hold even when the danger is mostly old memory wearing new clothes. That is one of the major life lessons here. Learning the difference between discernment and defensiveness. Discernment is sharp. Defensiveness is armored. Discernment sees clearly. Defensiveness sees danger everywhere and then acts shocked when nobody feels comfortable. Saturn in Scorpio has to sort that out. Power is another big theme. Not cartoon power. Not dramatic villain power with a swivel chair and a monologue. Real power. Emotional leverage. Financial entanglements. Sexual energy. Psychological influence. The ability to affect, bind, provoke, expose, or transform. Many people with this sign are very aware of power, even if they never use the word. They know when something is uneven. They know when one person has more leverage than the other. They know when control is hiding under tenderness or when dependence is being dressed up as devotion. That awareness can make them wise. It can also make it hard for them to surrender in healthy ways, because surrender requires trust, and trust is not handed out lightly here. So they may hold back pieces of themselves, not out of shallowness, out of caution. And while caution can protect them from real harm, it can also keep them in permanent emotional lockdown if they are not careful. Then nobody gets all the way in. Love becomes strategic. Intimacy becomes a test. Vulnerability becomes something they admire in theory and avoid in practice. That is a lonely way to live, even if it looks strong from the outside. Saturn in Scorpio also has a serious relationship with endings. Scorpio is the sign of death and rebirth, which sounds dramatic because it is. It deals with what must be shed, what decays, what cannot be carried forever, what changes form whether the ego likes it or not. Saturn here can make endings especially heavy. The person may struggle to let go. They may hold on to pain, memory, resentment, attachment, or old versions of themselves long after the chapter has closed. Not because they enjoy suffering, because release can feel dangerous. If I let go, who am I without this? If I forgive, what happens to my protection? If I move on, does that mean it did not matter? If I stop carrying this, what fills the space? These are not simple questions, and Saturn in Scorpio is not a simple sign. A lot of growth here comes from learning that control is not the same thing as safety. Sometimes gripping harder only keeps a wound alive. Sometimes loyalty to pain becomes a private identity. Sometimes the old story remains because it gives structure even when it no longer gives life. That is where transformation begins. Not the glamorous version people like to quote online. The real version. The version where a person realizes that surviving something and becoming shaped by it are not the same as needing to remain defined by it forever. Saturn in Scorpio can be remarkably resilient. That is one of its finest qualities. These are not usually people who fall apart at the first sign of pressure. They can endure. They can recover. They can rebuild from ugly material. They can face difficult truths and keep going. There is grit here, emotional stamina, a capacity to sit with what other people avoid. That is no small gift. In fact, some of the strongest people you will ever meet carry this sign. Not because life was easy, usually the opposite. Strength here gets forged the hard way, through confronting difficult material, through learning how to survive betrayal, grief, financial stress, betrayal of trust, intense attachment, or profound emotional change without becoming completely destroyed by it. But survival is only half the story. The other half is learning not to build your whole identity around surviving. That is huge for Saturn in Scorpio. Otherwise, the person becomes all armor, no softness, all strategy, no ease, all endurance, no joy. They can become so good at withstanding life that they forget they are also supposed to live it. This sign can bring very serious lessons around intimacy as well. Not just sex, though that can be part of it. Intimacy in the broader sense. Shared secrets, shared bodies, shared money, shared power, shared fear. The experience of saying, "Here is the part of me I do not show everyone." That is sacred territory for Saturn in Scorpio. It may take them a long time to trust someone there. They are usually not interested in shallow merging, empty passion, or emotional tourism. They want depth, but they want safety with it. They want honesty, but they also need proof. They may be magnetic without trying, mysterious without performing it, deeply loyal when they commit. Yet getting to that point can take time, and for good reason. When undeveloped, this sign can become controlling, secretive, possessive, or unwilling to admit fear directly. When mature, it becomes one of the most honest signs in the chart about what intimacy actually requires. Courage, trust, boundaries, self-knowledge, and the willingness to let another person see what is not polished. That maturity is powerful. There is also something here about emotional economy. Scorpio notices exchange. Who is giving more? Who owes what? What is shared? What is hidden? Saturn can make the person very serious about debt, dependence, entanglement, inheritance, or the practical side of shared resources. Some become careful with money because dependence feels risky. Others become highly alert to emotional debts, promises, obligations, and what people expect in return. They understand that nothing is ever just no big deal when people's survival instincts are involved. That can make them excellent in psychology, research, finance, healing work, crisis response, strategy, investigation, therapy, or any field that asks a person to stay calm while dealing with complicated material. Saturn in Scorpio can handle intensity. It can see beneath appearances. It can stay with a problem long enough to actually understand it instead of just making a speech about resilience and buying a candle. There is usefulness in that. Still, this sign has to watch the urge to close down when hurt. A wounded Saturn in Scorpio can go silent, go cold, go suspicious, or start controlling the environment instead of speaking plainly. It may hold grudges because the pain still feels alive. It may punish from a distance. It may refuse to need anyone and then resent everyone for not noticing. That pattern has to soften, not into naivety, not into weakness, into honesty. Say you are hurt. Say you are scared. Say you do not trust it yet. Say you need time. Say what the boundary is. Say what the fear actually is instead of building a whole emotional fortress and expecting other people to file the paperwork correctly. That kind of honesty changes everything for this sign. Because underneath all the control, there is usually profound sensitivity, deep loyalty, huge emotional depth, extraordinary capacity for love, devotion, insight, and transformation. Saturn in Scorpio is not cold. It is cautious. There is a difference. And once it learns that strength does not require permanent emotional lockdown, life opens up. Then the sharpness becomes wisdom instead of suspicion. Then the privacy becomes discernment instead of isolation. Then the intensity becomes depth instead of drama. Then the resilience becomes medicine instead of just proof that they can survive anything. That is the beautiful side of this sign. A mature Saturn in Scorpio has gravity, not heaviness for its own sake. Gravity. People feel that they are not shallow. They are not easily manipulated. They do not scare easily. They can handle complexity. They can sit with grief, truth, contradiction, and change without collapsing into nonsense. There is something deeply reassuring about that, especially when compassion joins the picture. Because the best version of Saturn in Scorpio is not just powerful. It is trustworthy. It knows how to hold sensitive material without exploiting it. It knows how to protect without controlling. It knows how to stay private without becoming inaccessible. It knows how to let life change it without becoming bitter. So if you have Saturn in Scorpio, the work is not to become less deep. That is probably not happening anyway. The work is to become less defended by what once kept you safe. To stop mistaking control for intimacy. To stop feeding old pain just because it has become familiar. To let trust grow where it has been earned. To let endings be endings. To understand that vulnerability is not a humiliation. To remember that being difficult to read is not the same as being strong. You are here to build emotional authority. The kind that can face truth without flinching. The kind that can love without possessing. The kind that can release what is over instead of embalming it and calling it loyalty. The kind that knows surviving is admirable, but living fully is the deeper victory. That was Saturn in Scorpio. Please like, subscribe, and stay with me for the rest of the Saturn in the Sign series.